All right. Welcome to the first of the AP Psychology lectures. Today, for the first one, we are just going to kind of do a little introduction to psychology. This one will probably be a little bit shorter than normal. Don't want to overwhelm you on the first day. Um, Afterwards, there is a check for understanding, just two questions, two short answer questions that you'll just have to answer and submit worth 5 informal points. They're kind of open ended. Um, these ones will be the questions that you're going to answer will be, they are just completion grade. I just kind of want to see, what you're thinking about stuff. The stuff that we're going to go over today is pretty basic. And I'm not usually going to tell you this, but for the most part, this is stuff that if you just kind of memorize it, you'll be fine. It's not really all that deep. It's just getting into the history of psychology. Most of it, some of the stuff is somewhat irrelevant now. It's just kind of the basis of what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the year. If you haven't already, you should make a copy of the student version of this PowerPoint that's linked on Canvas. And you can either print it off, annotate on it, or be typing on it with this in the background, however you want to do it. But you should be taking your own notes while I'm going over this content. So, without further ado, all right, so we're just going to kind of start off with what is psychology. It's a pretty basic definition. You know, a lot of you probably think psychology, you think mental disorders, serial killers, stuff like that. It is a lot broader than that. The basic definition of psychology, it is the study of behavior and mental processes. Okay, so in the past, they had sort of separated these two. Now we kind of see them as being combined with each other because behavior is sort of the what we are able to observe. It is objective, which means I can, if I'm looking at you and you're sitting in your seat, I can say with reasonable doubt that, hey, all right, I see that you are sitting in your seat. Okay, that is what you are doing. It is objective. That means that there is no bias involved, no bias involved in it. So behavior is just how we outwardly act. Mental processes, though, are more of what's going on the inside. They're internal and they are subjective, which means there could be bias involved there. You can tell me that, if you, let's say that you're dating somebody and they look like they're mad and you ask them what's wrong and they say nothing's wrong, okay, they can tell you that nothing's wrong, but you don't know for sure. Okay, we can easily lie about what is going on inside of us. So mental processes include emotions, thoughts, our intelligence, um, all of those different things. As I said, we used to kind of separate these two. Now we see them as interacting with each other. Some psychologists believe that that our outward behavior, is what causes our internal mental processes. Psychologists known as behaviorists. And then there are schools of psychology that think that it's our mental processes that control our behavior. It's called cognitive psychology. When it comes down to it, it's probably a mixture of both. But when it also comes down to it, both of them are produced by the 2.5 pound lump of neurons sitting at the top of our skull called our brain. Okay, so really just know the basic definition of psychology because we're going to get in throughout the year, we're going to get into what is behavior, what are mental processes, and how do they interact with each other. Um, You do also need to know, and this is again just a memorization thing kind of, there are the different careers in psychology. We have what are called psychologists. Psychologists, that includes counseling psychologists, which usually have some sort of graduate degree. They treat patients that have less severe issues. This might be school psychologists, guidance counselors, social workers, anything like that. And then we have what are called clinical psychologists, which generally have a PhD, a doctor of physical science. These are sort of the stereotypical when you think of a therapist, somebody may be lying on a couch talking about what they're dealing with, whatnot. These are the psychologists that are going to assess and treat people with psychological disorders through what's called psychotherapy or talk therapy. Psychologists, though, cannot prescribe medication. Okay, that's the big difference. Psychiatrists, on the other hand, are medical doctors and they can prescribe medication. Okay, they are medical doctors, so they can prescribe medication and they can also do talk therapy. All right, so really just know the difference between those two. One of the big issues we're going to talk about throughout the year is something that I'm sure most of you all have heard of before, the nature versus nurture issue. How much of who we are is due to our genetics, our nature, our body chemistry, our hormones, things like that. And then how much of who we are is due to our nurture, whether it's the environment that we grew up in, parenting styles, attachment styles with your parents, or even the prenatal environment. And there are a lot of big questions that'll come out of this. One of the big things that they look at with this is sexual orientation. We know that there is a genetic component to it. There can be differences in brain structure size between heterosexual and homosexual people. There can be differences in prenatal environment. We also do know that there is no evidence of that sexual orientation is determined socially. So we can talk about intelligence with this. I think that genetics plays about a 50 to 80% role in our overall intelligence. But this is something that is very, very difficult to measure. And it is also something that it's never just one or never just the other. For those of you that don't like it when things fall into the gray area on subjects, you're going to have a tough time with psychology. If you're a math person where you want to have either a right or wrong answer, there is never a clear-cut answer to anything in this class. Okay, so now getting into the history of psychology. What's called the first wave psychology. This is the late 1800s, structuralism and functionalism. These are two topics that are relatively irrelevant now, and you really just need to know the names and a kind of a basic definition of the two early fields of psychology. Both are not really considered to be legit anymore. Okay, so it's wave one, structuralism and functionalism, or wave one, introspection. One of the earliest of the modern psychologists, a German guy named Wilhelm Wundt, considered to be the father of psychology. He set up the first psychology lab in Germany. And in that lab, one of the main things that he did was he studied people's reactions to stimuli. We'll use that word stimuli a lot in this class. A stimuli is anything that is a part of our environment that could affect us. So, for instance, he measured people's reactions to when he bounced a ball in front of them to see how quickly they could react and catch it, and whatnot. Just know that name. On Canvas at the top of the Unit 1 page, there is a link for key names and vocabulary. Wilhelm Wundt is one of the key names. Actually, he's already filled in for you, but we're going to cover pretty much all of those key names today in this lecture. And so you can fill that out as we're going along, and you can and you don't have to fill out the definitions for terms, but you do have to do the real life examples. I'm going to give you some real life examples for some of these terms today. He referred to his early field of psychology as structuralism. Okay. What he wanted to do was, as it says on here, he believed that consciousness was made up of a bunch of individual pieces. Consciousness is everything that we are aware of, everything that we experience. We can also call it the mind. And he believed that it was made up of a bunch of individual pieces. He thought that humans were essentially like a puzzle. And when you lay out a puzzle, you got all these different pieces that are all scattered about. And when you're doing a puzzle, I love doing puzzles, you have to figure out how all of those pieces fit together. So that was kind of his goal, is putting together the pieces of human consciousness to build it into a structure. He wanted to make psychology more measurable, more scientific. He wanted to add an empirical value to psychology. For the purpose of this class, that's really all you need to know about structuralism. I'll give you a couple more little examples. But one of the other key terms that you need to associate with structuralism is this term introspection. Introspection means looking inward. And that was sort of that was the technique that he used for people to try to understand what was going on inside of them. Because what he wanted to look at was objective sensation, meaning everything that we are experiencing around us, which is relatively objective. And on the next slide, you'll kind of understand this more. And then our subjective experience, or what is called perception, to that sensation. Objective sensation is unbiased. Okay. Subjective experience, though, can be biased. He used introspection, where the person kind of looked inward and said, hey, I'm feeling this about this, so on and so forth. He said that consciousness was made up of three parts: sensations, images, and feelings. So for instance, what he would do is he may give one of his subjects a rose. And he ask him, all right, what is your current experience with this rose? And they may say, well, I can see that it's red. I can smell it. I can feel the thorns. It weighs this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's objective sensation right there. We would all agree on that. Okay. But then what he was most interested in is how that rose affected somebody internally. So when you look at that rose, how does it make you feel? So maybe it brings about a memory where somebody gave you a rose. It makes you feel a certain way, makes you feel happy because you think about love with it, or it makes you sad because somebody gave you a rose and then they broke up with you. Kind of the same way that, like, when you listen to a song, you can say, like, well, I hear this beat, it's playing in this key, blah, blah, blah. But then this song makes me remember this. and so on and so forth. So he was trying to split up those two. What is your objective experience? And then building up the structure of consciousness by using introspection to understand what's going on internally. Okay? I don't know why I said okay. You all aren't asking me questions. So now the other guy that you need to know here in this first wave, guy named William James. James is an American. He wrote the first psych textbook, Principles of Psychology. And he took Wundt's ideas and said, no, Wundt's not correct. Consciousness is not a structure, okay? Consciousness is fluid. Consciousness is always changing. And so instead of looking at how consciousness was structured, he wanted to look at what the purpose of consciousness was. So his field of psychology, which was same time but in America, called functionalism. How do these structures help us adapt and survive? Okay, rather looking at the pieces of the puzzle, okay, he looks at the whole. He looks at all of consciousness to see the overall purpose and see what the usefulness of the mind is. It'd be like if you were a computer person looking at different parts of the computer, the CPU, I don't know much about computers, versus what do these things do to help this computer function? Okay, so it's not something that's solid. It's something that is always changing and evolving to help us survive. That's really all you need to know about functionalism. Way that might help you remember this is, and it might not, I didn't come up with this mnemonic, but to help remember the field and the names, functionalism, F comes before J. F is closest to J, so functionalism and James. And then structuralism and Wundt, S is closest to W. I'm not going to play this video right now on here, but if you want to pause this and go to the student version of this and watch the video, feel free. A couple of other names you need to know. G. Stanley Hall worked with William James. He was the founder of the American Psychological Association. It's called the APA. And he was the first president of it. That's all you need to know about him. But he is a key name. Mary Whiton Calkins, first female president of the APA. She was actually denied a PhD because she was female. She was taught by William James, very interested in the internal self. And then Margaret Floyd Washburn is the first woman to receive a PhD in psychology. She was the second female president of the APA. She was really into animal cognition, so how animals think. All right, so those are key names that you just need to know who they are. Now, last thing, the second wave of psychology that kind of comes out of functionalism is what is called Gestalt. It's a German word. Okay, Gestalt looks at human experience, and it says that unlike structuralism, where we look at where we want to look at the individual pieces and then build those pieces into a whole, what is called bottom-up processing, it says that we actually, anything that we experience, we try to experience it as a whole rather than parts, because by experiencing it as a whole, right, we make it more meaningful. Okay, that's the main thing. We try to make everything around us meaningful, and so we look at the entirety of something rather than looking at the individual parts of it. Okay, so for instance, when you see two people holding hands, you don't say, oh, those are two people holding hands. I wonder why. And then you think through your mind, like, whoa, what are all the different options? See two people holding hands, you say, oh, you know what? I bet they're a couple. Okay, It's almost kind of like we make these broad assumptions about things. But it's our brain's natural inclination to make sense of whatever we are experiencing. Name that goes along with this is a guy named Max Wertheimer. Here, and just to kind of finish up with a couple of kind of fun things, you don't have this on your PowerPoint, but a few Gestalt optical illusions. So for instance, right here, this is a Gestalt principle that we'll talk about later called closure. You all should see a triangle in the middle around the blue little Pac-Man looking things. There in fact is not actually a triangle right there, right? But your brain fills in those pieces to make it more meaningful. Okay, called closure, we close things in. Okay, same thing right here with this zebra. You see a whole zebra. In fact, it's actually just a bunch of lines, but your brain closes in those white spaces to make sense of it, to see the entirety of it rather than the individual pieces. This right here, all right, I want you to look at it for a sec, but most of you should see a dog, okay? And you can see, I don't know if I can write on this or not. I guess I can. Yeah, like if you don't, there's the head, there's like the front leg, the front left leg, all right? Here's like the back left leg, like around there, okay? But your brain doesn't just see a whole bunch of spots, it sees a dog because we want to automatically make sense of the world. And why is this not? Oh, do that. Same thing right here. Sorry guys, I'm still learning how to use Screencastify. All right. There is obviously all that is right there is a bunch of spots, but your brain should see a dog walking right there, which I think this one is pretty crazy. All right. Couple more. Why is this not working now? Okay. All right. Right here, this is what's called a figure ground illusion. You focus on the black, what do you see? You should see some sort of vase, chalice, something like that. Okay. But then if you focus on the white, what do you see? You should see two faces looking at each other. Okay. So based off what you're looking at, your brain tries to make the most sense out of it. It's called figure ground. We'll talk about it later, but it's just whatever you are looking at is the figure, and then whatever is the background is the ground. Same thing here, depending on where you're looking. You could see a face if you're looking in the middle. Or if you look on the sides, you should see two horses and some birds. Another figure ground illusion. And that is it. Okay, so there you go. First psych lecture. Hope it wasn't too bad.